Super Tuesday's going to be here. Election's going to have happened by the time I get this.
I know. We're live, buddy. We're live.
We're good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right, fantastic. Welcome to Life on the Line. Life on the Line is a podcast, YouTube cast that is devoted to things relating to politics and theology and philosophy and life and godliness. Ministry Lifeline Community. My name is Brian Hurlbut. I'm lead pastor at Lifeline Community. I'm joined by Brad Homer, who is our pastor of media and worship. Brad, tell me about it today. What's going on? How you feeling?
Wow. I feel tired.
You feel
really,
tired?
really tired, but I'm excited to have this discussion.
That's why I have coffee. That's why I have coffee, Brad.
I thought, is that coffee?
Yeah, it is.
I have tea today.
That's why you're tired.
Maybe. It's kind of funny. We've been doing this a while, and really it's just people snooping in on our conversation.
Yeah. But you're a little more presentable here on YouTube than you are normally in conversation.
Got a face for YouTube.
But hey, we're going to talk today about a present issue. First of all, full disclosure, we're completely pro-life in terms of our position when it comes to the issue of abortion. That's obvious, I would think. If you
Were you asking me a question?
No, I'm stating it. Like you search my name online, you'll find that out, I'm sure. I mean, there's just this issue of life is a big deal. It's important. We support the Pregnancy Resource Center. I was down at the Walk for Life this week, walking around down at Liberty Park in a freezing cold, but it was fun. It was great. We just believe in a culture of life and believe in it really unashamedly. I think I wanted to talk about this, Brad, because it's been a thing. It's been a thing for years. I remember when I was a kid, and we've done shows on abortion before. Mm-hmm. We've had, the development director of the PRC locally here in Salt Lake City, George Stewart, who comes to our church, visit with us, connect with us. We have other staff members at the PRC who come to Lifeline. We support it quite a bit financially as a church. We get behind it. We do campaigns. We do all these kinds of things. And it was surprisingly, people probably listen to this podcast and they hear, at least me, they hear talk politically. They hear you too. But because I preach on Sundays a lot, like I'm not very political in a pulpit at all. But there's this sense in which
you're offensive, but not political.
Yeah,
well, I get it.
Very much. I just show up, and it's that way.
Yeah.
But politically speaking, we don't spend a ton of time on politics. This is going to be a fairly political one in one way. Paradoxically, we're going to go down a political road to try to show that we shouldn't go down a political road. That's part of it. Because this issue of abortion, one more thing though, this issue of abortion is just, we'll talk about how it's been ramping up, even in the last week, how it's been ramping up. Even when I thought there's no way it can ramp up more, it has.
All right. Tell me the most seminal idea about what the Bible shares concerning life and why we really don't have the right to take a life.
Behold, Psalm 127, 3-5. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb, a reward. So right away, verse 3, right? I get, wait a minute. Where do kids come from? The Lord. That doesn't mean they had a pre-existence. I'm not talking about that. That's not what the Bible teaches. But they are a gift from God. God is the one, Psalm 139, who knits us together in our mother's womb. Job 33:4, the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. Job 10:11-12, you clothed me with skin and flesh and knit me together with bones and sinews. You've granted me life and steadfast love, and your care has preserved my spirit. So back to Psalm 127, verse 3 again, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. He gives it. The fruit of the womb, a reward. It's a wonderful thing. It's a blessing. Verse 4, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. So the short answer is because God gives, and because God gives kindly, and a measure of his kindness is in the giving of life to an individual and placing that life within a womb.
Now, let me ask you a follow-up question, because a lot of people get caught in the accoutrements in the argument about abortion.
Yeah.
So would your position be...
I like that word, by the way.
The accoutrements.
Yeah, it's a good
My
job.
dad uses that.
Good job.
Yep.
Gene Homer, friend
Yeah.
of the show.
If he knew where to find it, he'd be a friend.
He would.
No, he actually is pretty internet savvy. He shares everything on Facebook. But
Don't they all?
Don't they all? But when the accoutrements would be this, they talk about incest, rape,
Yeah.
life of the mother.
Yeah.
Now, what would your position be theologically
Sure.
on each of those issues,
Yeah.
and why might some of them be a mute argument?
So the first one, I'll take life of the mother first. Life of the mother, I would say that is a medical evaluation and a familial decision. So I would say in that situation, you need to make a very difficult call because you're literally choosing between two lives. At that point, you are in an ethical dilemma and you have to make a choice. Okay. That doesn't mean that your choice then is murder, but it means that you have been put in a situation that is an ethical dilemma that you have to choose at that point, if in fact you have to choose. Now, I want to make a point about that because people say, well, see, that's what these laws are. The problem with these laws is it doesn't matter if the mother's life. That's, first of all, that's not true. Almost every one of these laws makes provision for the life of the mother. Secondly, though, such a minuscule, small percentage of these ever have to do with the life of the mother, especially in the Western world. In the Western world, this is like, we have so much by way of medical technology in where we're talking about laws here, right? So don't chase the mother, the life of the mother issue down and share with me scenarios from Africa. Like that's fine if we're going to talk about laws in Africa, but we're talking about laws here. So let's first recognize it does happen, but it's very, very minuscule because normally you're able to handle these issues and affairs long before they get there. Rape and incest, horrible things, wicked things, the violation of a woman, genuinely her body, not here this idea of a life within her, but like her body. You have ravaged her, someone's ravaged her body, and you have now a child as the result of that, right? But here's whose fault it's not. It's not the child's fault. So the idea that somehow she should not have to endure the consequence of that, if that's the language, we need to reword that and say, should she, out of the consequence of that, kill someone who's not at fault in that? So there's all kinds of options that emerge there. There's familial help. There's things that the PRC does by way of resourcing. There's adoption that's available. There's so many other alternatives that are possible to that end. And I would say the same for incest as far as that is. Someone say, well, what if the child's born deformed? I know. It's a possibility. If you get a prenatal test, you find out you're having a Down syndrome child, or you make a quality of life decision and say, now that child's going to cost the state X hundreds of thousands. That's what Iceland wants to do. They've eliminated Down syndrome almost because they've done that and taken it in their own hands. It's tragic. If you're listening and you've never, or watching, you spend any time with a Down syndrome person, you know how much blessing, do you know how much impact, do you know how much amazingness is invested from that life? It's unbelievable. So
there are people that really know how to love.
Oh my gosh. And, so, and that's one point. Someone might say, yeah, but what if it's even worse? What if it's, again, once you start grading quality of life, now all of a sudden you lose your arm tomorrow. Are you less valuable than you were before? You lose your hearing. Are you less valuable? You lose your sight. Are you less valuable? Like, at what point do you grade off? And the difference is this. Philosophically, you and I are not an aggregate of parts. We're not. We're a substance. We're not like my car that is a collection of parts that make a whole. That's not the case. That's why if I cut off my arm, I'm not less me. I cut off both arms, I'm not less me. I'm a substance that pervades a body. And that's true whether I have handicap physically or not.
So that truly ought to be the pro-life position of an evangelical.
Absolutely. 100%.
Now, that leads into
Yeah.
the interview you asked me to view
Yeah.
with
And so
Donald Trump.
Yeah, so I want to get to Trump.
We want to get there later?
Well, I kind of want to move. Yeah, I want to move there step by step.
Okay.
So I think here's where this is coming from, right?
Sorry, I'm in a hurry.
No, you're good. Here's where it's coming from. First, let me say that the point of this is to double down on the moral issue of abortion, and to do that in a way where we begin to expose how pragmatic thinking leads you away and alters your moral compass. So let me read you a paragraph of something, okay? So everybody who's listening, if you're a Trump supporter listening and you go, Bryan, it seems like you're always bagging on Trump. Well, let me be an equal opportunity offender. First of all, the very core of Joe Biden's platform and the very core of the Democrats, this is literally Democrats.org. This is the statement that's there for the Democratic National Committee and what they stand on reproductive rights. It's actually called Securing Reproductive Health, Rights, and Justice. And here's the paragraph I want to read so we understand. The core of the Democratic public platform. This doesn't mean I think every single Democrat necessarily holds to this fully. I'm not suggesting that. I suppose that there are some pro-life Democrats. They're not a lot, but there are some. But here is the stated platform of the party. Democrats oppose and will fight to overturn federal and state laws that create barriers to reproductive health and rights. Now, what reproductive health, what does that mean? Does that mean they're just wanting to make really good OBGYNs? No, it keeps going. We will repeal the Hyde Amendment. What's the Hyde Amendment? Hyde Amendment, 1977. States that no federal funds are going to go to be used for abortion. Okay? So they're saying we want to get that done. We want to be able to use federal funds from a governmental position of authority to pay for abortions. Now, when you say we're going to use federal funds, who funds the federal government? Taxpayers fund the federal government. So the reason the Hyde Amendment comes in the first place is because there are pro-life people who say, I don't want my tax dollars going to fund abortions, right? So they want to repeal that. So they want your taxes, mine, people watching, to pay for abortions and protect and codify the right to reproductive freedom. Reproductive freedom is a way of saying the freedom to have an abortion. We condemn acts of violence, harassment, and intimidation of reproductive health providers, patients, and staff. Now, if somebody said acts of violence, harassment, and intimidation, I'd go, oh, okay. But the interpretation of that is, does that mean the legal holding up of signs on a public sidewalk that I have constitutional provision for, or at least statewide provision for, because usually that's state by state laws, which we do. Look the other day to see. We do. We condemn acts of violence, harassment, intimidation, of reproductive health providers, patients, and staff. We will address the discrimination and barriers that inhibit meaningful access to reproductive health care services. Now, if you understand anything about the history of abortion as a political and moral issue in American culture, if you're watching this, you can do your own research on this. But you'll find Margaret Sanger's name, and you'll find out very quickly that abortion was linked to eugenics, and it was also linked out of eugenics to finding its way in really racism.
Sure. Yeah.
And
that was down in Georgia, right?
it was in
Georgia, South
Carolinas.
Carolinas?
Yeah. Yep. And is North Carolina in particular.
That's right.
It became a kind of thing that was used. So when it says discrimination, barriers that inhibit meaningful access, what has happened in history is that people, often African Americans, not solely but often, but people in lower income communities have had great access to abortion, and some of that historically was racially driven because it was seen from a racial lens that was a wicked, sinful lens of somehow being lesser people in that way. Horrible. And I say that, I don't say that that's what they mean right here. I'm just saying that when they write that, we will address the discrimination barriers that inhibit meaningful access to reproductive health care services. Please understand, they used historically in the South reproductive health care along the line of abortion was used for
To
discrimination.
limit populations of African Americans.
It was used as a tool of discrimination.
Yeah.
So including those based on gender, sexual orientation, which is a weird thing to say about reproductive health care, sexual orientation, gender identity, which is even weirder to say about that, race, income, disability, geography, and other factors. Democrats oppose restrictions on medication abortion care that are inconsistent with the most recent medical scientific evidence and that do not protect public health. So oppose restrictions, meaning that so your 16-year-old who can't buy a beer can go to CVS and buy 2 pills that back to back now will taken. One will cause the abortion, the other will allow it to release from her body. So, and right now Walgreens and CVS in states that are allowed, which by the way, I am not captain of Captain Pickett
Yes.
or a boycott the store. You know what I mean? I'm not, but I'll tell you this.
I don't go to CVS.
Personally, I don't go to Walgreens or CVS anymore. I won't, and I don't. And the reason, and even in my state here in Utah, they can't do that. They can't sell it here in Utah. But because they want to sell it elsewhere, I won't go. So
Lots of other choices.
Harmon's is getting my business and my prescriptions. But anyway, the point here is this is the Democratic platform. And so and the idea here, which is fascinating too, by the way, that it says that are inconsistent with the most recent medical and scientific evidence. Follow the science and it'll lead you to pro-life, friend. I mean, it's not rocket science. Biological science just leads you there. So this is the Democratic platform.
So the reproductive right they're talking about is the right of anyone who has become pregnant to eliminate their fetus in their body.
Yeah.
So it's really not when you say abortion, it's kind of a sanitized term a little bit. You know, it's not really descriptive fully of what's happening. It's the elimination of a life from a body.
That's right. And let's just say any woman. I mean, you've got this gender identity stuff. No, women get pregnant.
Well, there was recently someone, I think it was in Massachusetts or Connecticut. She was a Democrat on a city council, and she actually took issue with having the term pregnant persons.
Yeah.
Instead of
woman.
A pregnant woman.
Of course, it's
a mother. That she's like, I want to call them mothers.
Of course we should. This is ridiculous.
That's a major part of my identity, and it was kind of an odd exchange.
It's so fascinating to me. That people who are so progressive in their thinking are so anti in that way, pro-woman. I mean, as a dad of 3 daughters, that's repulsive, the idea. Anyway, that's a whole nother podcast. We can get on that. But here's the point. That's the Democratic platform. So let me give you a history. Donald Trump on abortion. Okay, here we go.
Right.
October 24th, 1999.
All
1999.
Right. Now, let me let you know one thing.
Yeah, talk to me.
I'm not expecting Donald Trump to remain consistent.
Bingo.
Okay, I'm just letting you know.
Jim J. Bullock would say, circle gets a square. Here we go.
Right.
Now, October 24th, 1999. Here's a quote, Meet the Press, Donald Trump. I'm very pro-choice. And he suggested in that his views in the interview suggested his views were shaped by liberal politics, by New York's liberal politics. Then he said, I hate the concept of abortion, but still, I just believe in choice. So 1999 is pro-choice. Fast forward 16 years. He says in 1999 that he's evolved on the issue, and he credited his evolution on the issue. This is when he's rising toward, moving on the Republican platform for that election in 2016. He credited that he had there was a child born to his friends that they were going to abort, and the child ended up being like a rock star. Was not a little rock star, but was awesome. And the kid did a bunch of great stuff. He loved the kid. He's like, now imagine that kid being aborted. That'd be a disaster, right? Okay, so great. I'm glad that he evolved on that. And he cited, by the way, in that Ronald Reagan, who also evolved on the issues, which of course, every time a Republican can cite 2 people, right? The two most famous Republicans, Abraham Lincoln and Ronald Reagan. Like every time they link to those 2, win-win, right? So he links himself to Reagan, who evolved on that issue as well, and so forth. And
Well, there are a few things he said about Lincoln that weren't very good.
yeah, that's things he said
Remember
about
those?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Later. Another show.
So you know though that he took that position, and then he kind of, if you imagine it, he kind of went down, sort of down in the cave of pro-life, the pro-life world a little bit. As he started to kind of go down, he here's a comment from March 1st, 2016. So 6 months later, after the August, 7 months after the August comment, he says, Planned Parenthood has done very good work for millions of women, but we're not going to allow and we're not going to fund as long as you have the abortion going on at Planned Parenthood. We understand that, and I've said it loud and clear. He says, we'll see what happens, but I've had thousands of letters from women that have been helped. This wasn't a setup. This was people writing letters. So here's what he's saying. Trump started, and he's like, yeah, Planned Parenthood's done a lot of good stuff. But I'm pro-life. I'm not going to support him with abortion. So he's starting to go down in maybe a positive way, right? He's getting down into that sort of pro-life cave, and he lived in there. He lived in there with much of his term, famously, right? He was the first, on January 24th, 2020, he was the first American sitting president to attend a March for Life rally. That is not something to pass by lightly. That's a big deal as a president, he's the first one. Pro-life, March for Life rally is an anti-abortion march in Washington. Fast forward to 2022, right? 2022. Trump claims victory, right, after the famous Supreme Court decision that overturns Roe v. Wade. Now, he claimed victory. Why? Because he put those judges during his term from 16 to 20, he put those judges in place. So 6-3, you get the Dobbs versus Jackson women's health decision. It ends up overturning Roe v. Wade, and it's an enormous win for the pro-life cause. So if we stopped there, full stop, we'd go, okay. And I've heard Donald Trump's the most pro-life president of, okay. I'm not ready to say that, but he did that, and that was huge, worthy of celebration, an amazing thing that happened, and I'm thankful for those Supreme Court justices, and I hope people realize that. That's a big, big deal. Now, January 1st, 2023, okay? What happened is after that, the summer of the Roe v. Wade overturning with the Dobbs versus Jackson's women's health decision, there was a backlash against anti-abortion sentiment. So against the pro-life cause, there's a backlash, a political backlash. There was a big upheaval, right? And you had people in a lot of scaremongering. Some of these stories that come out about, people's health is compromised and all this kind of stuff because they can't get access to abortion and the mother's life is being compromised. And these sort of like scare tactic stories start proliferating, and there's all this backlash that comes. In the backlash, there was an election at the end of 2022 that was the most of our people observing or listening know that while the presidential election happens every 4 years like that, on the off 2 years on a 4-year cycle are some Senate and House elections. So there were some Senate and House elections that took place, and the Democrats cleaned up. They won way more than even people thought they would win, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
It was a big deal.
It was supposed to be a red wave. It was a blue wave.
Blue wave. So January 1st, 2023, after that fallout, here's what he shared on his social media. Okay, this is January 21st, 2023. It wasn't my fault that the Republicans didn't live up to expectations in the midterms. It was the, quote, abortion issue poorly handled by many Republicans, especially those that firmly insisted on no exceptions, even in the case of rape, incest, or life of the mother, that lost large numbers of voters. So he then a little bit later, he lashed out, actually, a few days later, he lashed out at evangelical leaders who were withholding support for another what he's doing now, a third White House bid. And he mentioned that there was great disloyalty in the world of politics, and that's a sign of disloyalty, because after all he did with the Supreme Court justices and everything like that. So that's January of 2023, so a year and a year and a quarter ago. September 17th, 2023, he says, he's talking about Ron DeSantis, right? Because he's getting in the middle of the political campaign at that point. And he's talking about DeSantis and how, DeSantis had signed a law that banned abortion in most instances for any abortion that was over 6 weeks. So he pulled it way, way back down, which was awesome. Here's Trump. I think what he did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake. That's what he said about DeSantis. So then let's keep going forward. Let's fast forward to March 19th of this year. So we're less than a month ago, 3 weeks ago. He says he was on he had a radio appearance. He talked about how he was kind of flirting with a 15-week federal ban. And I remember hearing him talk about this, and he was kind of like insinuating, like, we got to arrive at a place of agreement. I'm the great negotiator. Get me at the table, and we'll just arrive at a federal place of agreement. He said, people are agreeing on 15, talking about 15 weeks. And I'm thinking in terms of that it'll come out to something that's very reasonable. Okay. So then 3 weeks forward, you get to April 8th. That was Monday. And on Truth Social, his social media platform, he had this whole statement that he put out. You watch it?
I have watched clips of it.
Okay.
But let me say something. I think it's interesting how he's giving some ground to negotiating whether or not rape, incest, number of weeks, all those things. But he's not understanding the type of decision it ought to be. And I think he may in the future if the law catches up with him. And this is why I want to say, how much, if he were to say, if someone were to say, well, let's negotiate how much jail time you should get for your offense, he would say,
No.
I don't want any jail
I don't
time.
want any jail time. No.
Well, he doesn't see it as the same type of issue. He doesn't want any jail time. As a pro-life person, they don't want any life taken. So it's a similar issue where the negotiation point is binary. It's on or off, yes or no. And there are gradations of let's make ground. Maybe he's trying to negotiate towards something, but it seems like it's ebbing and flowing one way
yes,
and the other.
Does
that make sense?
Yeah, you are. And I want to share a story that relates to that in 1 second. Because the April 8th thing is important on the video. He said this 50-year battle over Roe v. Wade took it out of the federal hands and brought it into the hearts, minds, and vote of the people in each state. This is what he said a couple days ago. It was really something. Now it's up to the states to do the right thing. So now it's completely, he wants it out of the federal conversation. He wants it into the states conversation. Okay. So states get to do what they're going to do. Now on that video, I watched the video. It's about 4.5 minutes or so. On that video, I wrote down word for word. So people can check this if they want to, but he said this: at the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. He says, you must follow your heart. And in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family, and do what's right for yourself. Do what's right for your children, and do what's right for your country, and vote. His appeal, follow your heart. Now, first of all, that's so poor on so many levels. It's the last thing I want to do is follow my heart. The heart is deceitful, desperately wicked. Who can know it? I don't want to follow my heart. And morality, while how I relate to morality might be an issue of the heart, morality as in it's right or wrong is not an issue of the heart. So I can have my heart properly aligned with what's moral, or I can have it misaligned with what's moral. But personal subjectivism and pragmatism do not dictate morality. And this is the point with Trump. What we're seeing is, I'm pro-choice 1999. We're seeing a descent into the cave of pro-life. The wonderful thing that happened around the Supreme Court justices, and now a movement subtly out. But here's the movement. The movement is driven because he found on January 1st, 2023, that it was no longer politically expedient to be tied to this tight pro-life moral issue. What happened is, now can I frame it and keep it in the pragmatic and political issue, which is what it always was for Trump. That's the point. It always was that. It was a movement. So to go to your point is, why isn't it the same as his trial in that way? It's because it doesn't affect him personally. And because it doesn't affect him personally, it now doesn't have the same moral sense about it because it doesn't impact him personally. So let me illustrate something. I was at a Senate, it was a House, I think it was a House subcommittee hearing years ago. And I was testifying down in the state of Utah here, and a friend of mine was a congressman. And he had invited me to come down, and he was sharing about a bill he was going to put forward. Now, the bill was not getting all the way to where we are even now in terms of life in the state, but it was a bill that was an attempt to mitigate aspects of abortion. As he's talking, a pro-choice congressman looked at him from the bench in condescension and said to him, Congressman, is this your way of trying to overturn a woman's right to have an abortion in this state? And my friend looked back at him and said, no, that's not it at all. This is just, and he stated what the intent of the bill is. And then he paused. I'll never forget. He paused and he looked at the congressman and he said, but I'll be back with that bill later on. And the whole place erupted. And his point was this: he was pro-life because of moral reasons, not political reasons. He 100% wanted abortion overturned. But he realized to get to that moral point, he needed to be able to have a pragmatic approach to get to that end. What you're seeing with Donald Trump is the exact opposite. We're at a place where we can apprehend. Some states have apprehended sweeping laws. This is the whole controversy from April 9th, the next day after Trump made this statement, what happened in Arizona with the reenacting of an 1864 law that criminalizes abortion across the board, except in the cases of a life of a mother. Other states have done similar things. We're at a place where you can shut this down, except in that one case for the life of the mother where you have to have a personal doctoral conference to determine what we're going to do here, a place with your pastor, a place with like serious conversation. Outside of that, said none. Trump just called that a mistake. He called the Arizona decision a mistake. So what we're seeing is the pragmatic trajectory is actually taking Trump away from morality. It's not a movement progressively to move to a greater moral compass.
Now, if you're delineating two types of thought that he's having, political and moral, and you're evaluating both of them, wouldn't you say the statement he made is a political statement, though, not a moral statement?
Which statement?
About that was a mistake.
Yes. But it is a moral statement too. And so it's a political statement, but he's exposing his moral hierarchy because for him, the greater moral hierarchy is that the Republicans win. And he's right, realizing that probably doubling down makes it harder for Republican politics. So somebody listening goes, yeah, and he's right. Yes, he is right. He is right directionally and strategically. That doesn't mean he's right morally. And so that's the point. It's good
pragmatically right, not morally right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. And lots of things are pragmatically okay that aren't morally okay. I mean, if a young girl is poor and has no money and she doesn't have any way to get food, and she says, "I'm going to sell my body, and I'm going to prostitute myself," does now the end of her obtaining money to get food make the prostitution a morally appropriate thing? If a guy is on the street and he can't make any money and he's there living in poverty and he decides that he has a sister who's also there with him. So he pimps her out for money. Does that mean that now the pragmatic of them getting money so they can eat justifies the sexual dynamics of her being objectified and her body being used for the sake of money? Of course not. So the pragmatic doesn't make it morally sound or morally reasonable. And so that's a philosophical problem, and which actually is where I kind of wanted to go with this thing, right? So what I wanted to do is I jotted down six, I guess, sort of six things that I think
alliterate
kind
them.
of easy. They are
Do it real quick.
They are alliterated.
Oh.
I'm going to give them to you. Six things that we can alliterate that tell us about abortion being a matter of morality, not a matter of politics. And someone may go, well, Bryan, it is political. Because I know it's political, but it's the same way somebody can say, well, heroin use is an issue of the law. It's not an issue of no, it's an issue of morality. The moment you start talking about it in laws, you're just talking about how morality lands in the legal sphere. But it's still a moral question.
So
politics are always moral. The problem is you got to start with morality first. You don't get to start with politics. Trump wants to start with politics and back into morality.
So that's why it's not the best decision for someone who thinks pragmatically to say, hey, we're still chipping away at this thing, and I'm going to win the election, back away and come forward. So since they're doing it from a political bent, or a pragmatic bent, and not firstly a moral bent, it has the opportunity to disintegrate the cause.
Yes, but I want to qualify one thing.
Okay.
The qualifier is that people, prior to all the ground gained by the overturning of Roe v. Wade, may have legitimately said, okay, I'm pro-life, but I'm going to campaign on just getting this much ground, with a view to getting greater ground. Mm-hmm. The problem is we've got the ground. He's actually giving up the ground. He's doing something pragmatically that doesn't need to be done because the ground is already gained. What he's attempting to do is pragmatically do something that actually exposes that for him, the win is not saving babies. The win is making sure that the broader Republican platform is in office. And my point is that the broader Republican platform is a far secondary issue to the morality of whether or not a child in the womb is killed or not.
So the pro-life person would potentially vote for him if he does a really good bait and switch.
Yeah, they're doing that. And so, I saw one commentator, certainly from the other side of the fence, so to speak, on this, but he was right. So Mike Pence came out, okay? Mike Pence came out right after this happened. Pence came out and said, President Trump's retreat on the right to life is a slap in the face of the millions of pro-life Americans who voted for him in 2016 and 2020. And so he shared on what used to be Twitter, but X. He shared that, right? So Pence, who is like whether everybody agrees with Pence and everything or not, is not even the point. My point is Pence is like authentically morally pro-life.
He's principled.
For him, it is a principled moral issue. What this commentator pointed out is, and he commended Pence. He's like, this really is, like, he recognized, he's like, Mike Pence really believes it's wrong, morally speaking. And he pointed out, he said, Donald Trump doesn't really care. For him, it's just political. He cares about his advancement. And so it worked. That's why he went down in the cave on the pro-life pieces, because it met his advancement. Now he waffles a little bit on it, and you start to see that waffle. Listen, I'm going to tell you, I'm not the prophet or the son of a prophet, but I'm going to tell you now, if it advances his political cause, you'll only see more waffling, because his North Star is not the moral issue of a baby. That's not the North Star for him. The North Star is what advances the political enterprise of getting him in office. For Mike Pence, it doesn't. For Mike Pence, it's just wrong.
So if I'm hearing you right, what we see is Trump putting politics first,
yes,
when morals should be first, but that's what everyone else is doing anyways.
Yep. And so that's the question: is do we look at the world?
We're all hosed.
Do we look at the world and we go, well, that's what everybody's doing. That's what everybody's doing.
Yeah.
And that's honestly been one of the pragmatic pieces that has governed politics. It's why the discourse is the way the discourse is. Well, that's what everybody's doing. I'm finally glad we have somebody to tell the truth. Tell them like it is. Get in their face, you know? Because that's what everybody's doing.
And he does do that, but he's doing it firstly for politics.
Yes.
Not for
That's right.
principle. Where then we get guys like Pence who come out and
we say things like Mike Pence is inelectable.
He's unelectable.
That's a way of saying he cares too much about morality. He's too principled for politics. And you know what? They're right. They're right. He is too principled for politics.
But he is principled enough to govern.
He is.
Yeah.
But the point is, for the present presidential zeitgeist, he's too principled. And what I would say to him is, I'd say, good on you. That's to your good. That's praiseworthy that you're so principled. You're so principled when you're the pragmatic of rising to the top publicly comes against your principles. You will choose not to rise to the top.
You know what's funny with Trump? He ran in 2016 on not being political.
Yes.
Isn't that hilarious?
It is.
But
what happened is...
critical decision is made for political capital.
But I think what happened there, Brad, a little bit, is that Trump was to politics what hipsters were to culture. And that is he became the anti who became the pro. And so that's what a hipster does. Because all of a sudden, what happened? Portland became the coolest city in the world. And it was born out of being countercultural. It became its own culture. It became its own thing, man. And now it became the thing to be the thing who wasn't the thing. And that's what happened with Trump. And I think he started to realize that early. Trump's smart, man. He's smart. And he realized early that being anti-establishment, being outside the politic, being the avant-garde guy, being the truth sayer, being the guy that became now the way to do politics. So he went from being outside the mainstream to literally not being in the mainstream. He became the mainstream.
Yeah. There is the Trump latte.
Yeah.
They all drink it.
Yep.
Yeah,
so here's some of these points I want to bang out real quick.
All right.
First thing, you got to get the anchor right. Anchor right. We anchor politics to morality, not morality to politics. Say that again. You have to, when you approach an issue like abortion, you have to get the anchor right. What are you tying abortion off to? You're tying it off to the moral principle. You're not tying it off to politics. So we anchor politics to morality. That's how we tie politics. What should I do politically? What's the right thing to do? That's the question. Not what works. Not what works. Second is we get the argument right. Not the anchor, but the argument. We argue from principles, not from pragmatics. So we don't go with what works. We go with what is. We go with what ought to be, and we make our arguments there. So first we get the anchor right. Second, we get the argument right. Third, we get the attitude right. What does that mean? That means that when the cultural zeitgeist goes this direction, we have an unrelenting resolve to anchor according to what's right, argue what's right, with an attitude that says we will be resolved to keep going against the cultural angst. That's what's lacking right now. Is, okay, we're getting resistance. Now, hey, I didn't lose that election for y'all. Who lost it? Those Republicans that are making all these wide blanket statements about abortion and not taking into account all these other extenuating circumstances. Got to get the attitude right. Fourth, you get the application right. And what do I mean by that? I mean that when I saw that thing from April 9th in Arizona, I go, yes, amazing. We support as much sweeping legislation as possible given our governmental structure and constraints. I'm looking for the broadest bans. I'm looking for the biggest stuff. Bill, you better believe I support a federal ban. I want as much ban as I can possibly get on preserving life. It's like if somebody came to me and said, so do you support, is it just states' rights in regard to slavery, or would you support a federal ban against slavery? No, I'll support a federal ban against slavery because slavery's wrong. Like I don't need to say, let's push that to the states. I would have fought blue, not gray. in the Civil War? Why should you fight blue or gray in regard to, so right now, what Donald Trump's saying is we should fight gray in regard to abortion. No, I don't want to fight gray in regard to abortion. I want to fight blue. I'm going to be on the side of the union when it comes to the issue of abortion, if I were to draw the parallels to slavery. Fifth, getting the avenues right. We love and lobby to resource families and restrict destruction. So we're going to fight for that, right? Lobby for it. We're going to resource, we're going to love families well in that way. It's not just about in the womb, but it is include in the womb. You can't just step outside of that either. And then the final one is we got to get the arc right, A-R-C, right? The arc, right? We approach everything with the arc of redemption in view, not with a political regime in view. The arc is a redemptive arc. It's not a political arc. We're not moving along a pragmatic arc. We're not moving along a political arc. We're moving along a redemptive arc. And the redemptive arc is concerned with the principles of gospel as they play themselves out in the life of culture. So those 6 things, getting the anchor right, argument right, attitude right, application right, avenues right, arc right, is where I think we have to process the moral compass as it relates to this stuff.
Where do you think people are getting held up?
Pragmatics. I think there's Christians who have completely swallowed the pill of getting things done. And so that's one of the reasons why the evangelical lobby is now blindly with Trump. And because they see and they've sort of already made the deal with that. Mm-hmm. And so they got to walk it out now. And now there's the danger is that you're now seeing where that's going, where that's headed. My question is, how far will the evangelical church keep hitching its wagon to that horse? Is there a point in time where they'll say, okay, that's too far. I can't do that anymore. I got to unhook from that. They're afraid to. And they're afraid to because they look over and they see Biden on the other side. And I understand that fear. It's a legitimate fear. I can see that fear. So that's why I'm empathetic when I hear somebody say, I'm going to hold my nose and vote for Trump. I'm empathetic to it. I can understand it. I can see how they got there, but I want them to see that they are that what's happening in that is there's a rejection of principle for pragmatics that's happening in that. So I do want to say buyer beware and be fully aware of what that might mean for you down the line, because you might be linking yourself to something that's going to have some pretty high costs to pay in the process.
So why do you think historically Christians are swallowing the bait of pragmatics? What's a little bit behind that?
Well, one is a little bit of a narrative of, there's some legitimate narrative of like we're the oppressed people, but there's also a little bit of false narrative with it. So I've heard people say things like, we almost like evangelicals have been this minority that has been like oppressed in culture and we're fighting for the voice, and now we have the voice. Maybe Trump gave us the voice we never had before. And I would say, that's crazy. Are you kidding me? Like the only reason George W. Bush got elected the first time was the evangelical voting bloc. Mm-hmm. That's an empirical historical fact. Karl Rove lobbied the evangelicals and put George W. Bush in the White House. And every historian is going to look at that and recognize the only reason he got there was the evangelical voting bloc that came behind him. So evangelicals have had, and I'm not even going to say an outsized voice, they've just had a sized voice. I mean, because, if you look at stats and things like that, probably waning at this point, but back in the time of George W. Bush, you're looking at like a third of America that would say that they're evangelical. So that's a big voice. A third of America getting behind you, pretty big. You don't, mm-hmm. You only need 20% more and you're over the hump at that point. So he got that, right? So, but I think there is a little bit of this, we're the little brother, and we gotta have this kind of voice. Where we're headed now is there's like a theological, it kind of goes to some of the Christian nationalistic sentiment that we talked about in a few podcasts ago. There's a little bit of we're going to operate through this lens of government, and that's part of our commission now, is to sort of get in this Christianized political atmosphere and Christianize it from the top down, even though historically that's not been overly helpful to the church to do that. But we're going to do that anyway. And that actually is bent from, there's some genuine, authentic theological pieces that people buy into that feeds that, right? So while I disagree with Doug Wilson and where he goes with that, I can at least recognize that he's genuinely coming from a postmillennial perspective that walks that out. I can accept that, and I can disagree with him, but I don't have to see him as being disingenuine. I can see him as genuinely following his theological trajectory. So like if people think like that Wilson is like some, political monger trying to, no, he's just walking out an honest postmillennial theology. So there's some of that that's happening too.
Now, discussing abortion is not just a hot topic. It's an awkward topic
Yeah.
with someone. Let's say we're two friends at a coffee shop. We're catching up on life. And all of a sudden, I'm the friend that says, looks at you and says, "You're pro-life?"
Yeah.
Like, why would you be pro-life?
Is
you're
the
just
person talking to
insane.
me? Is the person talking to me a Christian or non-Christian?
Non-Christian.
Oh, the first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to quote Nacho Libre, and I'm going to refer to, was it Esquelito, his partner in the wrestling, the skinny guy, and I'm going to say, I believe in science. Don't you believe in science? I believe in science. That's what I would say back to them. I believe in science. Don't you believe in science? And they're going to probably say, I believe in science. I'm going to say, well, then science is pro-life. I mean, science is very clear what that thing is. All it needs is air, food, and water, all external substances. It has every other thing that makes it a human life. So I'm going to press down on science is where I'm first going to go. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about what makes it this being different from the animals. What is it that separates this fetus from a goat and from a donkey and from a cow and from a dog? And I'm going to talk about its potential capacities. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the myth of it being an appendage and a cellular glob within the mother. So I want to start with science. I actually just had this conversation, a much more immediate and maybe probably a little more spicy conversation than it would be a friend.
I like spice.
But when I was at the Walk for Life, a guy pulled up alongside us and he said, "Hey, just so you know, I hope that if you are if you're pro-life, you're against the military," was his statement. And the reason why is, well, military ends up killing people in war. And so if you're out here saying you're pro-life, you must be against the military. And I asked him, I said, are you pro-choice? And he said, yeah, I'm pro-choice. I said, oh, so you're against the military, so you're for the military. And he said, well, no. I said, oh, so you're inconsistent in your worldview then. You're pro-choice, but you're pro-military. I don't understand. Why would you then, from the inconsistency of your worldview, try to correct what you think is an inconsistency in my worldview? And that started us down a road. And my point to him was, if you're really really against the military, then you would actually be pro-life based upon what you said to me. And I told him, follow the science. Follow the science. Do you know the science? And it came clear he didn't really know the science, and he admitted he didn't really know the science. And I said, well, you should follow the science. I think that would be helpful.
And the other thing is a discussion about what science can answer and what science cannot answer.
Mm-hmm.
So science cannot answer questions about value, about beauty.
No,
they can
it can't.
answer questions about what and how.
But here's what science can do. Science, and this would be my point to my friend, science can tell me that there is a distinct gap between me and an animal. Science can tell me that there's continuity in what that thing in the womb is and what I am outside the womb. Science can tell me that I have all the intrinsic biological properties are available in the womb to that being that are in me outside the womb. Mm-hmm. So my point is that science can't tell me about the soul of that.
Correct.
But science can tell me that there's continuity that exists between the creatureliness of that and the creatureliness of me on a straight continuum. And it can tell me that all the potentialities subsist in that subsist in me. So that's where I want to go with that.
Well, I think a follow-up to that's why I brought it up, is you might get to where you have equal points of view on the science. And that's kind of a foundation for having the other discussion about, well, who determines what gives value to life?
Sure.
And if they kind of bring up another pragmatic ethic of, well, the herd determines
Yeah.
whether or not life is important, viable, worthy, then we have a lot of ammunition there, because as soon as not many people would be altruistic and sane enough to say, well, I'm retiring this year. I guess it's time to walk into the woods and never come back.
Yeah. So,
You know?
yeah, because what happens there, Brad, is you in that conversation, what you'll find is they're only going to have two places primarily that they can secure their moral compass from. And the two places are, one is going to be most likely the herd. So it's going to be whatever culture is saying in the cultural zeitgeist at that time. Or it's going to be some type of graded state at which that being in the womb has arrived at. So let's take the first one. The first one, well, that depends upon the herd. And I can do, so, well, the herd in Nazi Germany had one saying different than the herd today has. So whose herd do we go by? Now it just becomes a war of herds and it becomes a tribalistic warfare, right? So that doesn't actually answer the question at all. It actually just makes morality a power struggle. Is
Yes.
all that does. The second issue then, though,
Which is why we shouldn't see morality as a power struggle.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it will all be dead.
Yeah.
And that's what we're finding. The other is I put it on a grade. But then I get to say, well, okay, but what's the grade and who gets to say the grade? And that really just pushes it back to the power struggle. But let's just go with it for a minute. So is it 22 weeks vitality, or viability rather? I mean, the state of viability. That's what some will say. It's a state of viability. Well, is it that, or is it productivity to society? Now all of a sudden the Down syndrome question comes into view. Now functionality comes into view. Now you see the human being not as a substance but an aggregate of parts. Now all of a sudden, well, that 1-year-old, even when they are a fully functioning 1-year-old, costs the state. They can't feed what 6-month-old can feed itself? It'll feed itself. It still needs food supplied to it.
I could.
You could, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was
like
really
you
good
like
at it.
Dwight Schrute and you absorbed your twin. But it couldn't. So the point is
Forgot about that.
it still needs something provided to it again and again. So the point is this, that the moment you start grading it on a continuum, right, it's arbitrary now. It becomes arbitrary. So you got to have something absolute to anchor it to. And the moment people resist that and go, no, you can't, think of the alternatives. It's a power struggle or it's an arbitrary grade-off.
Well, that's what
where
Trump
you're
is
gonna
doing.
land. That's what's happening.
And he's finding
what's
where,
happening.
what shade of the gradation he's
Culture.
going to get
Based
the
on
most
culture.
votes.
That's right. So it's just digressing to that. So that's my point in this whole thing to wrap us up is it really lands at a place where I recognize, reject the Democratic platform, of course, 100%, but also see where this is headed, because you might be hitching your wagon to something that you're going to end up you're going to end up co-signing on checks that you're not morally going to want to cash. Be really, really careful as this thing continues to progress. So
Well, I think that wraps up our time today.
wraps it up. Thanks
How
for
do
joining
people
us.
get in touch with us?
You can email me at Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, at lifelinecommunity.com. That's Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, at lifelinecommunity.com. They can email you at Brad, B-R-A-D, at lifelinecommunity.com. Brad, B-R-A-D, at lifelinecommunity.com. Where else social media can they catch us?
You can catch us on at Lifeline UT, and also if you're watching on YouTube, you already know this, but if you're on the podcast that listens to this, it's at Life OTL on YouTube.
So I want to find it on YouTube. What should I put in the search browser?
At Life OTL,
Okay.
because John Travolta took the other ones.
Life
Yeah.
O.
Life on the Line. There was a movie.
Okay.
But
at Life
at
OTL.
Life OTL. But also, people can join us here in West Jordan
Yeah, they
for
can.
church.
9 a.m., 11 a.m. Sundays. Come check us out. And you go to lifelinecommunity.com and you, the bunch of media there and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff that you can
It could
take
take
in.
over your life.
It could take over your life. There's a
Yeah.
lot of media there.
A lot.
Hey, awesome. Great show. Thanks for joining us. Blessings on y'all. Take care.